Battle Realms. This was one of the first real-time strategy I've ever played. Maybe not the very first, but it's the one that made me fall in love with the genre. I remember playing Age of Empire after this for the first time and getting confused about the villagers not entering the barracks to train. It's a very unique gaming concept and execution. Before we get to the story, let's talk mechanics for a second. In this game, peasants are periodically generated from a hut and spawn from different ones each time if allowed. The less population you have, the more quickly they are generated. The peasants can do 5 things. They can build, they can collect resources, rice and water, they can use water to improve rice growth rate or put out fires, they can tame horses, and they can train. There are 4 different buildings you can train them in. 5 with the expansion, but we'll cover it later. The bathhouse, and the other faction's equivalent, trades your peasant for a geisha, they're this game healer unit. The other 3 buildings are a melee one, a ranged one, and a special one. By training a peasant in one building you get a tier 1 unit. By training that unit in another building you get a hybrid tier 2 unit. And if you train in all 3 of them, you get your tier 3 unit. It seems simple enough, but there's a lot more to it than that. Let's talk factions. There are 4 clans: the Dragon, which is your typical Japanese flavored one, the Serpent, its more evil brigand themed version, the Wolf, the Caveman faction, and the Lotus, the super advanced dark magic using slaver edgelords. No faction has an extra building over the others, but the units are all drastically different from one another, as there's one in them factor, which is damage types and resistances. Turns out that every unit deals a different kind of damage, which combined with the target's resistance to it determines their effectiveness. These damage types are not standardized. One unit might beat a faction's tier 3 but not another one might win in direct ranged combat but lose up close, and the samurai gets hard countered by a tier 1 dryad, which is supposed to be a support unit. This is not explained anywhere, and if it wasn't for the game's wiki, you need a lot of guesswork in order to figure this out. You are helped by your cursor changing color, which can help in low unit situations, but the extremely zoomed in camera paired with the gigantic UI and jumpy units make this game a nightmare to micro. It's not terrible balance wise, but it creates an obscure web of counters that you have no choice but to look up. Also, every unit has a hidden passive which helps them in various situations. These two are hidden from players. So, when you play a skirmish or if you manage to wrangle a friends to play with, you better have the wiki open. And this is without factoring in the abilities you can give your units. They vary from utility ones to damage and resistance ones. They can completely flip some engagements and there's no way of knowing which enemy unit does which. There are also passive upgrades called techniques purchasable from the training buildings. These two give some bonuses that can and will help in some situation depending on your army composition. They cost a third resource, yin or yang points, depending on your faction. You gain these by fighting. They can be spent on these passive upgrades or on heroes at the keep. Heroes are well worth their cost and can easily give you an edge in an engagement. Beside the unique heroes, there are 2 generic ones: monks for wolf and dragon, and ninjas for lotus and serpent. They are nice and cheap to get for when a push is happening. One last thing is horses. They are essentially an extra life bar for your guys, except when against area of effect weapons. They have the ability to deal damage around them and can quickly move your troops around without having to use their stamina. They are finite though. You can also assign them to peasants to boost the resource harvest rate. The campaigns follows the antics of Kenji, the last surviving heir of the Serpent clan who had run away from his home after being accused of killing his father. In the first mission, you get to pick your faction in the most organic way I've ever seen in an RTS.
Run! Shinja's men are coming!
You're no villager. Kill your share of peasants and I'll find you a place in Shinja's band. Yeah!
Kill enough peasants and you're taking the side of your late father's men and play as the serpent. Fight the bandits and you'll play as the dragon. Whatever choice you make, you'll spend the first mission pacifying your empire and securing the loyalty of the serpent's lieutenants. After most missions, you get the choice of where to go next. It doesn't really affect the story, but actually gives a lot of replayability, as some scenarios are mutually exclusive. I especially like how Kenji's attitude changes with his clan allegiance.
There must be a better way.
They fight because they fear the Serpent Clan.
I'm not my father, Atomo.
There are worse men you could be.
Not many.
This is madness, Kenji. We've driven these people from their homes.
My homes, their fields, their livestock, their daughters, their sons, all mine. This is Serpent Land.
You sound like your father.
There are worse men to be.
This is a precursor to the other real-time strategy game's turn-based tactical campaign map, although no mission is truly just a skirmish here. Speaking of the first mission, I want to talk about tutorials. When I first played this game, I couldn't be bothered finishing it, and I really don't blame myself. Look at this. There's a genre-spanning discussion about what an RTS game should do to accommodate new players. And in that amazing prologue, there's a very good example on how to handle a campaign integrated tutorial. What happens when a smug but inexperienced player decides to skip the tutorial? Or maybe a very old man is playing and already forgot how to? Well, the game doesn't force anything to you, but look at what happens if you fail to move Kenji in a reasonable time.
Left-click me to select me. After I am selected, right-click on the ground and I will move. Alternatively, right-click on an enemy and I will attack. Left-click something else if you want to deselect me.
Despite being one of the first strategy game I've ever played, I never knew this was a thing. Seems like a very small inclusion, but with such a thin genre, any game could be the player's first, and the last thing you want is him getting confused. Especially in 2001, when you couldn't really rely on the fact that people knew what strategy games were. I know I didn't. The campaign gets really brutal once past the first level, but I finally managed to beat it. Most of the difficulty comes from level design. The campaign is no stranger to letting you start far away from any resource and asking you to do a mad rush to the closest rice field and hoping it is clear of enemies. Either that or placing you in almost undefendable locations with very little space for buildings. After recruiting some units, you'll have to scrub the map clear of enemy buildings, which can lead to frustrating moments as you have to backtrack your steps and check all the corners you might have missed. But how does a skirmish match in this game plays out? The beginning is solely focused on booming. Early units do not have the damage to do meaningful harassment, considering how good peasants are at fighting, how quickly they respawn with low numbers, and how hard it is to crack a tower or any building in the early game. If you could somehow catch your opponent unprepared, then maybe you could deal some significant damage, but there's literally nothing but training buildings to spend your resources on in the early game. You could build more huts, and apparently they do speed up the peasant creation process, but it's negligible for their cost. Although this doesn't stop the AI from building 15 of them just to make a push harder. It's only worth to put more than one down to use as a resource drop-off point, or in the late game to move up your unit creation chain. They do give you more resource cap, but floating resources is something you don't want to do in any real-time strategy game, and 3 huts should be enough for the whole match. The best idea is to keep defending until you have maxed out your pop cap and have your endgame buildings, then carry some peasants to the front to use them as shield, to tower drop, or to move your unit production up. When you factor all these things together, you'll see that letting the AI do their thing will make for a long game. Having the peasants spawn automatically also makes map control worthless. Aside from needing the space to build your stuff, there's no reason not to keep your units around until they're ready for a push. If you were to secure another rice field beside your starting one, it wouldn't really be of any use to you. While rice does take a while to regrow and thus slow your income the further from your hut the peasants has to cut it, there's no reason to spread your economy out, except maybe to secure horses. Now, how different do the factions play? The differences, beside the fact that your unit counter different ones, are in the abilities, healers, the endgame buildings, and the towers. The towers are mostly the same but have different abilities. Lotus deal damage, the dragon stuns, the serpent's blinds and increases vulnerabilities, and the wolf slows. Most units have access to 2 abilities, but how they're acquired differ. The serpent and dragon both use buildings you train your unit into. The wolf has 1 building for a passive armor upgrade, or an active ability can be granted by an upgraded dryad, their faction version of the geisha. Lastly, the lotus is a bit more complex. When you train a unit in the 3rd building, it gains an ability to transform into their tier 3 unit, which can be useful during combat if microed properly or used immediately. As for the actual abilities, they can be granted by one of the Crypt Brothers, which are hero-like version of their tier 1 units. Tier 2 units can also get their other ability by devouring a peasant. Warlocks and Master Warlocks can get a different ability from each of the three brothers, bringing their possible upgrades at 3. Now the endgame buildings. Lotus can trade 2 Warlocks for a Master Warlock, Serpent can trade 4 Ronins for a Necromancer, Dragon sacrifices for Samurai for a big AoE damage, and Wolf just has the extra armor upgrade building. But their blessed Berserkers can turn into werewolves. Speaking of the Wolf clan, they also have a particular quirk. Instead of domesticating horses, they bring them to a feeding pit, where they're eaten by wolves. A peasant can then train there to become a packmaster to lead them into battle. Lastly, the healers. Dragons and serpents are similar but with different stats. The Lotus use crows instead of stamina, which they replenish automatically, but they also use to attack. And finally, the wolf has no true healer, as the druidesses are disabled instead. They truly did a good job at making the clans feel different, not just mechanically but visually as well. From the UI to the different designs of huts, wells and towers, you immediately get the vibe they were going for. The voice acting too is really memorable, for better or worse.
Murderer!
He saved our lives.
He killed his own father!
I am humble. The path is the way. Forward is not backward. Look at my muscles! Yeah, let's go!
The music is also pretty good, it perfectly complements the game's style. I wish I could say the graphics aged well, but it's by far the game's weak point. The fact that the camera is extremely zoomed in doesn't help much in masking models or the terrain. Distinguishing heights or locations where you can build is also particularly difficult. The expansion added new units for every clan, plus an upgrade to their healers and a new campaign, this time playing as the wolf. It follows Greyback, a character we've seen in the main campaign before, in his quest to free his people from slavery. It gives some backstory to the relationship between the Wolf and Lotus clan. I've not finished the campaign yet, because after the 4th consecutive mine mission where you have to free your prisoner comrades, I was beginning to yawn. It probably gets better though. Now, while I do not consider this game a must-play or a masterpiece or even great, I still think it has value for real-time strategy enthusiasts just to see something radically different from the norm. It has its fair share of problems, but in some departments it's still surprisingly modern, like with the option to customize hotkeys, which isn't something to take for granted today. So if you like the footage I've shown and are intrigued by this game, maybe buy it on GOG. Just remember to download the resolution patch. Okay, that's all. Thanks for watching.